on now, and I hope everybody's happy with that. We've had a lot of people sign up to be here tonight who are clearly not here yet, so it would be nice to be able to make it available to them on our website. As I've already said, we are in the wonderful world of the internet, so if you do lose the connection, then the best thing to do is to wait a minute. If that doesn't work, good old-fashioned log in, log out, and hopefully that will bring you back. You've got a choice, an option in terms of viewing. You can either view everyone or you can view the speaker. I think it's probably best for tonight that you use the view everyone, because you'll be able to see everybody and the reactions of people as different comments and views are given and different responses come. The purpose of the conference is that we felt it was time to revisit the Every Child Matters agenda, which was very important in the late 80s, early 90s. And it was very much at the heart of government policy and what was happening in education. But to really think about that, sort of revisiting it with an idea of thinking about resetting education, the idea that we've all been through a long experience with the pandemic, and how, as we hopefully emerge from that experience, how do we use that experience to improve the educational experience for our young people? So we have on our panel this evening and Dr. Noel Purdy, Margaret Mulholland, Nigel Murray, Mark Diakopoulos, Daniel Sobel, and Michelle de Midlier. If I introduce first Mark. Mark is Assistant Professor of Teaching, Education and Leadership at Pittsburgh State University. He researches diverse topics such as meaningful integration of social and emotional learning into the curriculum, educational technology and social studies, pre-service education, teacher candidate dispositions, and the ever-evolving identities of teachers and educators, so plenty to keep him busy there. Mark has over 25 years experience, 10 as a high school teacher in England, with the rest in the USA as a social studies teacher, technology expert, and teacher educator. He describes himself as a dad, Arsenal fan, sometimes soccer coach, semi-retired broken aikidoka, probably haven't pronounced that right, but not necessarily in that order. So welcome to Mark. Our second guest this evening is Nigel Patrick Murray, who is at the moment trying to log in and come back. So hopefully he'll be back with us.
I've done it, I think.
Oh, brilliant. Well done. So Nigel is an MBE and a retired British Paralympic athlete. He's a 13-time English national champion and 7-time British champion and multiple Paralympic medal winner in the sport of boccia, having completed 5 Paralympic Games as well as numerous World and European Championships during his distinguished playing career. I'm not certain of a lot of things tonight, but I'm pretty certain he has the most gold medals amongst everybody that's part of tonight's event. Murray was born and lives in Leamington Spa. He won gold in the BC2 class during the 2000 Summer Paralympics in Sydney, Australia. Although he only reached the quarterfinals in Athens 4 years later, he followed this up with a silver medal in the same event and a gold medal in the team event during the 2008 Summer Paralympics in Beijing. After Beijing, Nigel continued to win numerous medals on the world stage before captaining the GB Boccia team at the London 2012 Paralympics, winning the bronze in the team BC1-2 event in front of home, family and friends at the Excel Arena. Really pleased, Nigel, that you're now not just with us, but on microphone as well. So welcome to you.
Okay.
Our third guest this evening is Daniel Sobel. Daniel is the founder and lead consultant of Inclusion Expert, an internationally respected leader in inclusive education. He has advised the Department of Education, the European Union governments, and led various large-scale initiatives involving thousands of schools. Daniel has an enormous following on, particularly in LinkedIn, and is highly regarded and sought-after speaker for his provocative and often hilarious presentations and refreshingly original approach to education and including leadership. He is the author of several books, including the Pupil Premium Handbook, the SEN Code of Practice Pack. His best-selling books, Narrowing the Attainment Gap, Leading on Pastoral Care, are available now, and the Inclusive Classroom just released in 2021, all published by Bloomsbury Press. So once again, a very expert member of our panel. Our next member of the panel is Dr. Noel Purdy, who very kindly is stepping in for Professor Stan Tucker, who unfortunately is unwell. Thank you for stepping in, and thank you for being part of the panel, Noel. Noel is Director of Research and Scholarship at Stranmillis University College in Belfast, where he is also Head of Education Studies. He is Director of the Stranmillis Centre for Research in Educational Underachievement. He leads the MED model on international perspectives on bullying and was chair of the Northern Ireland Anti-Bullying Forum 2013 to 2016. In July 2020, he was appointed independent chair of the Ministerial Expert Panel to consider persistent educational underachievement in Northern Ireland. His other claims to fame is that he is currently deputy editor and a member of the editorial board for NAPCE's academic journal, Pastoral Care and Education. Our next member of the panel is Margaret Mulholland. Margaret, are you with us? I haven't seen you yet.
I'm here, yeah. Hi.
Excellent. Well, welcome, Margaret. Margaret is the Inclusion Policy Advisor for the Association of Schools and College Leaders, ASCL, who are good partners of NAPCE, and we've worked with ASCL for many years now. ASCL represents 20,000 school leaders and acts on behalf of pupils in their schools. Her extensive training and leadership experience spans both mainstream and special schools. Margaret is an honorary Norham Fellow of the University of Oxford. She also writes a column on research and inclusivity for the Times Educational Supplement, a leading advocate for the role settings play in improving understanding of inclusive teaching and learning. Mark brings over 20 years experience in ITT innovation and practice. She spent 7 years as Director of Development and Research at a leading special school and 13 years at the Institute of Education, where she was responsible for innovative employment-based routes to qualified teacher status, PGCE secondary partnerships. Margaret sits on the University's Council for the Education of Teachers, is an advisor to the UK Government and IT curriculum development, and works with local authorities and as an external advisor for NQTs, ITT, and leadership development. And finally, final member of the panel tonight, welcome to Michelle de Midlier. Michelle is an experienced teacher, school leader, multi-academy trust and school improvement coach. Over the last 25 years, she says that she has been fortunate, and I'm sure they've been fortunate to have you working with schools with an emphasis on the leadership of curriculum, school evaluation and monitoring, professional learning and development, and performance accountability. With my roots firmly embedded in the discipline of psychology, my passion is for all things grounded in an understanding of the social and cognitive components of learning and leadership. I'm professionally motivated by both learning, talk, and deliberate action in moderation, of course. Learning through leadership provides one-to-one coaching and bespoke individual and group programs to develop school leadership at all levels. So a big welcome to all of our panel, and a big welcome to our audience as well, who we hope that you will join in the discussion tonight. You can do so by using the chat function, or you can use Twitter. And the hashtag for the conference is Twitter NAPCE @NAPCE1. So please take opportunities to use that. And I'm going to stop sharing, but I just want to mention briefly that the last day of the conference is tomorrow morning, and we have 3 more presentations, and we hope as many people as possible will also join us on Friday. So I'm going to move very quickly to the first question, and what I'm going to do is ask members of the panel to respond to the question, and I'll keep my eye on the chat and see if we get comments and questions coming in as well. So our first question, panel, is Is it more important to change how schools are organised or how young people learn? Perhaps if we go to Daniel first with that one.
Thanks for coming to me first. In some ways it's easier, but I think I'll try and take an alternative route and leave some of the more obvious things to say to other people. I don't think we can ever change the way that children learn, in the sense that children are always learning. Whether they're learning well or not is a different matter. And so, you know, to what extent can we change the interruption of learning? Can we change the focus of learning or the style of learning? Yeah, of course. And is that a good thing to do? Yeah, I'm sure everyone would agree. I'm interested in the organizational element. There's a lot that I should say that teachers assume. I mean, teachers tend to be a fairly conservative bunch, rule followers. And so there is an assumption that a lot of teachers have, except for sociology teachers, of course, who like to question everything. And I wonder how many people here have ever taught sociology. You know, that we end up being, you know, the criticizers of education. But there's it's an interesting assumption that we all sort of walk into the hierarchy, the structure, the fact that we have this sort of, I call it in a sort of rather dramatic way, some sort of like age apartheid, that we sort of split children, you know, definitively at a definitive age group for some reason, and so on and so forth. I mean, all of these are just assumed by people that this is a sort of good way of doing things. I don't share those assumptions. I feel much more comfortable about thinking, well, you know, if it was up to me, and I should say probably, thank goodness it isn't, let's take a wrecking ball to the whole thing and just reinvent the process of the structure, and wouldn't that be exciting? That would make me, I would be excited to be part of a group, and I certainly wouldn't want to take any responsibility for what happened in the end. Let me just perhaps mention two things, specific affirmative ideas, and then I'll pass on. One is, I put in my second book an idea which is a completely different way of thinking about inclusion, and how, by means of an example, by means of restructuring the school, then there is an idea of what it would mean in its ramifications for the interactions of children, and how they would feel as being part of that organization. And so if imagine that we say to a classroom, you will either all succeed, and we would have to define what succeed means, and we would have to define what the rewards are, and what failure means. But basically we say, you either all succeed or you all fail. Now off you go. Then almost, if you could think about it in a sort of social experimental terms, then what you would find, and this has been tried a few times, is that the different strengths come out in the classroom to support where there are weaknesses, that social inclusion is needed. It's almost like an affirmative, inclusive idea that drives that we're all in this together. Now, it's quite a sort of African village concept. You know, we all survive or we all die. You know, we either all eat or we don't, you know. And it may be at the moment, it seems very esoteric. But for me, the idea of restructuring in that kind of a way is a much more attractive concept than the idea of having a sort of summative exam system where, by definition, 50% are going to feel like at the bottom. You know, they're not as good as everyone else. So that's one major restructuring concept, which has already been tried. I mean, there is a word for it called Ubuntu. I think at the moment it's just like a fanciful idea for the world of education. How it would get applied and everything, I don't know. I'm not a details person. There's one other thing I would sort of say is I'm quite interested in, I mean, a lot of schools toy with the idea of engagement of students, and they would like to sort of give voice to children. But I'm interested in democratic schools, of which there are some good examples, very few in England, but quite a lot in the States and various other countries, where democratic schools, they shift the emphasis of responsibility, motivation, engagement on a sort of whole school structural level. And they see ramifications across things like relationships, aspiration, and so on and so forth. So I know that there's probably a lot more sensible and straightforward things to say, but I wanted to come in at the angle of structure in particular. So I'm just adding those two specific items of Ubuntu and democratic schools. I think those two would be an exciting place to start, because I think they would have ramifications on everything else.
Thank you, Daniel. I love the idea of the wrecking ball approach to educational strategy. I just think don't anybody let Gavin Williamson know about that, because that could be pretty scary. Margaret, is it more important to change how schools are organised or how people learn, how young people learn?
I think in a very similar way, I think it's most important to change the environment, because as Daniel said, we can't really change the way children learn, but we can change the experience of learning for them, and the environment can do that. So we do that in the classroom, don't we? We sort of say, when we're supporting a child who's particularly vulnerable, we don't think about how do we change this child in order for them to learn better. We actually think, how can we change the environment in order to support them to access the learning better? How do we change the environment to support them to thrive? So I think adjustment is really important in order to achieve inclusive and successful and rewarding learning. And I think one of the points that Daniel raised would be really worth us thinking about across the piece, really, is that sort of that notion of how do we develop that kind of holistic sense of learning, that value in both the academic and the pastoral, because they're not binary. How do we make sure that the whole child is thriving? And I think one of the things that we might need to change is the way in which schools are supported and funded, and the way in which the accountability framework is structured, because much of that is very siloed. So the way in which we achieve our goals as school leaders is often around each of those individual strands of development, whether it's safeguarding, whether it's the academic attainment, whether it's the relationships with parents. Each of those strands of our school life is judged in separate ways. And I think what we need to do is take a much more holistic approach. And so get rid of those silos and start thinking about how do we wrap a sense of belonging around each child. And that's the environment I'd like to see. And I think those silos have to be challenged in order to achieve that.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm going to come to Nigel next, because Nigel is not an educationalist, with a different perspective on it. Nigel, what's your view? Is it more important to change how schools are organised or how young people learn? I lost Nigel for a minute. He was there a second ago. Okay, perhaps come back to Nigel. Noel, perhaps if I come to you next.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And this is a wonderful question, because actually we've had this wrecking ball for our school system in the last year and a half, and it's been COVID. And let's not forget it. You know, if somebody had said 2 years ago that we would have had 2 extended periods in the UK where schools were closed to most pupils, I don't think we would have believed it for that amount of time, for the 6 months roughly that schools have been closed. And much as that is a wrecking ball, and wrecking balls are perceived to be very negative often, wrecking balls can actually be the stimulus for new growth and for fresh ideas. And actually, whenever children were at home, and I had 4 children at home being homeschooled for weeks and months at a time, it certainly made us all think more clearly about what schools were actually about, and what opportunities are there for us to build back better. Wasn't that the phrase that we were told? And to learn from that experience. And certainly I know many parents have a renewed respect for teachers and the teaching profession after the pandemic. So it's made us certainly think about why we need school, what school's about, and why it's important. But there are opportunities, I think, as well to think about how schools are organised and for what purpose. And it goes back to the kind of lectures that I would give to first-year initial teacher education students about the purpose of schooling and the purpose of education. You know, is it for a prosperous economy? Is it to produce high exam grades? Is it to produce well-rounded citizens? Is it to produce happy, healthy children? And I think there's actually been a renewed focus on that last one following the last 18 months. So in terms of how schools are organised, well, let's organise schools coming out of this pandemic to produce happy, healthy children. And I would say that that's probably the priority as we move forward.
Thank you, Noel. I think, as you say, lots of really positive things can come out of the pandemic, and it does give us an opportunity to reflect on what school is all about, as you said. And I saw quite a few people on the panel nodding their heads while you were saying that, so thank you. Mark, you probably haven't heard some of those wonderful phrases from Boris Johnson, if you've heard of him, that Noel was talking about. But if we come across to you in the States, what do you think? Is it how schools are organised that needs to change, or how young people learn?
Well, I think we're having the same discussion and debate, particularly through and post-pandemic. So it boils down to, for me and a few of my colleagues, we kind of seen this as a chance to ask that same question that Noel was saying: well, what really matters? And what's education really for? And what we're finding is that we've got some places where they're really looking at reorganising how school happens and what school should be doing. We have a couple of private organisations who are in the process of buying up disused shopping malls and trying to use those spaces, but to leverage a more personalised type of instruction where students can, it's a fully democratic model. Here's what I'm interested in. Here's what I want to learn about. We see here a lot of our school systems where they run multiple schools will start using academy programs to specialise in interests that students can then take. So we're seeing that in a little bit already organisationally, but at the same time, we do, although how children learn doesn't change, we know more now than we did even 10 or 15 years ago about how children learn. And we don't maybe leverage that knowledge well enough. So we've understood that, our children need to be comfortable, they need to feel safe, they need to feel happy, they've got to be in a good environment conducive to that learning, they've got to hit their social and emotional needs, but above all else, they've got to have a vested interest in what they're learning, and it's got to matter to them. And so when we're asking students to learn, I taught social studies or history, but if we ask them to learn about dead Romans, what's it matter? Does it matter if you're 12 that we're learning about Romans? So how we rephrase the curriculum is going to be key. So there's, of course, a kind of an organisation piece to this. Can we find those compelling questions that make it matter? We're talking about something like that. Are we really talking about how do we organise our society? How do we run power structures? What's it mean to be, what is justice? What's fairness? All those issues that kids sort of can latch onto and understand. So there's that going on too. And I think, the pandemic's been a great, here's a great wrecking ball, but it's also been a great opportunity for us to say, well, okay, we've had parents, as teachers, we've had parents in our classrooms fundamentally, and we've been guests in their home doing teaching. And so, we've had this two-way, the curtains have been lifted and people can see more about what we do and what we say. And we know that the people that have been very successful with students have been the ones where they've actually made the students feel that it does still matter and learning online is worthwhile, even though we're going through this collective trauma of a pandemic. And the ones who have struggled are the ones who have just sort of said, here's what we're learning, it's math today, and if you don't do this, there's a conflict. Grades don't matter. I mean, we all have children and have children who say, well, it doesn't matter if I fail, it's just stuff. With everything else going on, the planet's burning or whatever. There's a, there's this collective trauma going on, and we haven't addressed it. So there's a bit of both going on there. Maybe we need to reorganize the process of learning and how we do schools and the purposes of schooling to be better at meeting those students' needs, and at the same time leverage what we know about how kids learn to make that more relevant to them. And relevance is really about rooting instruction in their lived experience and making it matter to them.
Thank you, Mark. It sounds very much as if we've almost got that wrecking ball in our hands, and we're seeing opportunities coming in the future, and that's quite exciting and quite positive. Nigel's let me know that his connection keeps going in and out, so I'll try Nigel again. Are you there at the moment, Nigel? Nope, lost the connection then. So I'm going to come to Michelle. Same question really for you, Michelle. Is it more important to change how schools are organised or how young people learn?
Well, not surprisingly, a lot of what's been said already is kind of resonates enormously with my perspective on this, and I think, there's an element of both to the answer. But I wanted to pick up on what Margaret was saying around kind of the siloed nature of structural organisation within schools, and how the pandemic in particular has really, thrown those kind of silos to one side really, and given a common focus in terms of both focusing how children best learn and how they can do that remotely, and the skills and the characteristics that they need to do that, but at the same time how we address the barriers and recognise the barriers to learning in a multiple contexts that our children are working in a home environment. So actually I live in in the optimistic utopia future that many of us do, that we will learn from this. My worry, if I'm honest, is that as habitual creatures, that what we'll do is we'll slip back to the comfort zones of where we were pre-pandemic and lose the learning opportunities that go forward. So, for me, the importance of the question here is that we've got to harness this energy of learning that we've done over the last 18 months in order to start asking ourselves some difficult questions about what vision we have for our young people. My view on this, and probably I've tangented off from the question, is that I think one of the habits that we have to change is the focus around what we do as adults in school, and a much more learner-centric focus on the experience of young people as whole people in this. And I think probably, again, going off piste here, recognizing that the social dynamic of school, alongside the focus and almost obsession with knowledge that we've got at the moment. And there's a real danger, I think, that with a siloed approach to school organisation, that we're going to find ourselves at loggerheads between the knowledge and learning and the care and support and helping our learners to learn better in a social context. And I hope that's made some sort of sense as a response.
No, absolutely, Michelle. And I think what you're saying there really is we mustn't miss the opportunity. And I think everybody in the panel has given the same sort of idea that the feeling that this is an opportunity, and it's something that mustn't be missed, to actually re-question what schools are for, what education's for, what learning is for, and to avoid your worry that we just slip back into what's seen as being the norm. Any comments from anybody in the audience? I think most people in the audience are keeping themselves well hidden camera-wise, but I can see a few nods. Okay, in that case, I'm going to move on to another question, and this is a question which came out of the conference yesterday from one of the speakers, and questions that were raised afterwards on Twitter. Panel, how important is it that adults in schools talk and listen to children and young people? Perhaps if I come to Margaret first with that one.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, such an important question, particularly in light of the concerns that school teachers, school leaders, parents, young people all have at the moment in terms of the sexual harassment issues that have been raised over the last few months, which aren't, by the way, new, as we know, but have been raised as a sort of key area of concern. And I think one of the things that we have got a real opportunity with is to use the concerns that Ofsted have emphasised, if you like, in their sexual harassment review. We use that opportunity to really think about what is authentic voice. You know, what is it that we need to be doing in order to listen better, but also in order to give young people more agency in terms of what we do next. And I think, or I worry, that there could be some real tokenistic response to this, especially with the pressure that everybody's under at the moment in terms of school and what next, and supporting their school community. I think if we rush this, we risk not getting it right, and we risk sort of using student voice as a sort of mechanism for control rather than the genuine, how do we get them to participate in how do we allow young people to find their voice, but also then to have some real sort of power to shape next steps. And I think a real opportunity there to really extend participation, to extend pupil voice, but also to think about how we as practitioners listen and how we work together in order to achieve that. So,
yeah, thank you, Margaret.
Great idea.
It very much came from a presentation about the challenges that you talked about peer-to-peer abuse that has been very prominent in the news recently. And I think, Mark, if we come to you, I think that the sort of everyone's invited agenda has been in the States as well, hasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that it's been the agenda, but it's kind of been selectively done. So we hear schools talk about how they value student voice and they give choice, and there's a lot of autonomy. But at the same time, it's only for a select few students. We're worried about knowledge, we're worried about test scores, we're worried about grades, and you know, issues of poverty, inequality, and here race permeate throughout our system too. And you know, there are several school systems that are on the surface quite innovative, but you can see that they're still struggling with issues of, you know, desegregating 25, 30, 40 years ago. And so that really sort of doesn't help when we're trying to talk about young people, you know, developing as whole adults. So, you know, we see lots of marginalized populations in our schools who struggle, really do. And I think systemically, there's not much in the way for them to have voice. You know, so we do look at control a lot. We do look at rules rather than learning, and that conservatism still sort of rolls through in how we go through structurally. So, but we're seeing that movement more towards being more personalised in instruction, to listening to what young people need and want. But I think one of the key things that's happening now, and we're seeing it in some areas of the country, is we're seeing as we look to go back into the new academic year, in some areas 40% of parents and students are opting not to come back into public education, and they're either very well off, in which case they're going to the private sector because they feel safer there with people like them, or we're seeing lots of marginalized folks who found schools just unfriendly places to be, and actually were happier learning at home and want some sort of format there. So we're seeing a rise in sort of online and virtual schooling throughout the country as an option for them, because for them, that's where it's meeting their social emotional needs, because then they're not peer bullied, they're not picked on, they're not marginalized. and I don't know whether that's being repeated in what's happening over there. You know, we have a lot more sort of parental choice here as well, so that happens too. We're seeing in some places up to 40% don't intend to come back to school in any sort of face-to-face environment, regardless of what districts are going to do, and that says something to where we're at and how we're not meeting students' needs where they should be.
That's amazing, Mark, and it's probably useful for us to hear that many of the issues that we think are only happening here in the UK are happening elsewhere as well, and that need to be addressed. Michelle, question is, how important is it that adults in schools talk and listen to children and young people?
Well, as a self-confessed lover of talking, my answer is always going to be incredibly important, and I kind of go back to my experience in schools when student voice was popular, and it was a trend, and it was important. And one of the things that was one of the conversations around at the time was about kind of co-construction with our students, and the real importance of not just voice for voice sake, but actually to be part of the development and the evolution of our schooling systems. And you know, as a young teacher, I was quite influenced by the likes of organisations like Summerhill. If you can kind of remember those sorts of contexts. But my point here is that I think from a generation of teachers that is an older generation of teachers, why it's so important now is because there is a disconnect often between teachers in schools and the experience of young people. And I'm suspecting that Mark does quite a lot of stuff in terms of the generational element of teachers coming into the profession. But when you look at the kind of characteristics and the profiles of the Generation Zers, of our young people, I've got two children, 19 and 22, but their experience is so different of the world. And we have to hold our hands up, I think, as educationists, to say we don't necessarily have that connect with those young people. We don't necessarily understand those day-to-day experiences that they've got. So the only way in which we're going to understand that is by developing talk and developing our empathy and our ability to be able to perspective take in order to be inclusive and understand what that's like. And I think that's going to take a huge shift in, again, our habits and our practices around what we do in schools. You know, I work a lot with you know, middle and senior leaders around what we call, you know, describing kind of looking for learning, and it's amazing how many school leaders and teachers I've not got the habit of sitting in the seats of those learners and understanding what the experience is like. So for me, talk is central to that, bringing things back to the learner at the heart of everything and the centre of everything. And I'd love to say our utopia future has some answers and we're heading in the right direction, but I'm not necessarily seeing that. So.
Well, the huge implications there for anybody that's in a pastoral role, because obviously at the heart of a pastoral role is having empathy and understanding for the young people you're working with. Daniel, what's your take on that question? How important is it that adults in school talk and listen to children and young people?
I really like what's been said. So for fear of just echoing the wisdom that's already been said already, let me just come in at a slightly different angle. And I actually think that what's been said is more important than what I'm about to add. But I think my bit is an additional element that we need to be thinking about, which is about teachers' capacity to listen. I had a slightly different and unusual tumble into teaching, because I hadn't graduated school myself with any A-levels and I didn't get a first degree. but I had actually done some training in psychotherapy, and I wangled my way onto a master's in education psychology. So actually listening and counselling was much more of, for me, an art form that I'd been introduced to and was more natural. And that informed my understanding of what's happening in the organisation that we call the school, and how we need to interact with people in a certain way that's, you know, to our great benefit. So there are two practical elements to this. One is, I've been saying recently, much too controversially, and certainly without enough evidence or backing. So I will happily take pot shots from anyone who just completely disagrees with me. I mean, I'm completely unfounded in when they say this, but I really feel this. How about that? That at the moment there isn't, at the entry point into teaching, there isn't a factor of a sort of emotional intelligence. We're not really assessing people for emotional intelligence and their capacity to be able to understand children, even like children necessarily. And I think that there needs to be, and I'm sorry I don't have a wealth of evidence for that. I'm not sure if there is a wealth of evidence for that. I have seen a particular school where they decided that their teacher interview was based on emotional intelligence. And actually it's an interesting debate as to how you can assess that. And I did try to dig down a little bit. What do you mean? And they said, well, we do a whites of the eyes interview. I don't know what that means. Anyway, nonetheless, I was very impressed with their notion that they feel that it is difficult to ever teach a teacher emotional intelligence, but they can teach them teaching skills. And so, whereas most teachers are looking for, most schools, I should say, are looking for the level of teaching skill, the pedagogic activity to be demonstrated in an interview, which would then land you the job. What they were saying is, no. If you've got emotional intelligence and a certain attitude towards teaching, then we will teach you how to teach. So that's one strand which I would add to this conversation. And then there's a second strand, which has been a bugbear of mine. I did do this in my school, and I'm quite happy to say that I've been working with an amazing group therapist who's based in Ireland, and we've worked with the local authorities of Suffolk and Norfolk, doing teaching teachers how to lead peer-led supervision. And I think there's one thing saying that we want our children to be speaking with our teachers more, but actually I think there's a huge stress and burden on our teachers already. I don't think I need to persuade anyone of that. And what I would like to see is more peer-led supervision. And of course, ideally, we would have psychologists going to schools and providing supervision across the piece. But you can't do that with the mere 400 schools in Norfolk. How are you supposed to manage that? So I'm quite interested in the idea of peer-led support groups. Now, actually, peer-led support groups, there's been those in existence, I think, since the 1890s or something. They're pretty well evidenced as being pretty good. That kind of thing, I think, would add to the whole piece of how teachers interact with children, have the capacity to listen to children, and be open to them. So, and it's also a potential framework for feedback, for skills development, and it's all very much peer-led rather than hierarchy of knowledge-led. Like, I've got loads of knowledge and I'm going to share it with you, so you better listen up. It's a different form of CPD. It's about teachers listening to each other and supporting each other as human beings. I teach in a number of master's courses. My team and I deliver master's training, and I always go on about this idea of the existential relationship between teachers and children, as we are just human beings, warts and all. And I think creating a framework that enables us vulnerable humans to encounter other vulnerable humans in safe ways is good. And simply to have the aspiration of let's get more talking done without the skills package and without the support framework, I think is piling on more pressures. And stresses and pressures are the enemy of inclusion, I think. The enemy of inclusion. I've just made that up. I'm not sure if that's really true, but it sounds good. My next novel, The Enemy of Inclusion. There you go.
I think that one will be coming out just after that other novel, The Whites of Their Eyes Interviews. I think that's an interesting approach as well. Thank you, Daniel. That was a fascinating insight and some really interesting ideas there. We've looked at the States, but if we come across the water again to Ireland, Noel, what's your view? How important is it that adults in schools talk and listen to children and young people?
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, I think this goes to the heart of pastoral care, doesn't it? Really, it's about relationship, and I think we all can understand that we don't really appreciate relationships where all the communication is one way. So listening to children and young people, I don't think anybody here today is going to disagree with that. But I'll wear my pastoral care and education hat just for a moment. As Phil said at the start, I'm deputy editor and standing in for Stan Tucker, the editor, tonight. We had a special issue on this very subject of co-participation just last year that I co-edited with the wonderful Barbara Spears from Adelaide. So if you haven't seen our special issue last year, it's the 3rd issue of Pastoral Care and Education. It's my plug for that special issue and a great series of articles which give wonderful international examples of how young people have been engaged in research and activities around pastoral care. But I think the two challenges here, and they've been mentioned probably already, is first of all to avoid the tokenistic approaches to the voice of the child. We hear a lot about the UNCRC and Article 12 and so on, but moving beyond the sort of tokenistic approaches that, oh yes, we've engaged with young people, of course we've engaged with young people. What does that actually mean? And is it moving beyond tokenism? And secondly, what does it actually mean in terms of being representative too? Because I've come across a number of groups in schools, and actually groups that charities have run as well, which are sort of young people's advisory groups and so on, and they're full of the same people, the same young people, highly articulate, very middle class, wonderfully bright, educated young people, head boy, head girl material, and it's wonderful in some ways, but I really like getting beyond that and giving a voice to the disadvantaged, to the marginalized, to the voiceless, those with special educational needs, those that don't have their voice heard. And the work that I did this year for the Education Minister in Northern Ireland around underachievement, we specifically went out and heard the voices of young people from disadvantaged communities, the very children and young people whose voices are very rarely heard in participatory activities and groups and so on. And they talked about respect, and they talked about relationship, and they talked about the importance of teachers listening to them and respecting them as individuals. So that's my challenge, I suppose, with this question. We all agree that it's important, of course we all agree, but it's getting beyond the tokenism, and it's giving a voice to those who, to be honest, we normally pass by and don't listen to.
Thank you very much, Noel. I think you're right. I think the question has really gone to the heart of pastoral care, and lots of different issues have emerged in response to that question. Is any comments from anybody in the audience? Go to Anne.
That was really interesting listening to all of you. And Mark might remember back in the day when Phil was setting up a peer counselling service, and how that made the news on Channel 4 and everything, and the peer group were actually leading it. And what would be interested in this day and age now, as I think people were saying earlier, that we're in a different world now, that we are not aware of what the kids have been through. Okay, we've had the children that we've seen go through it, but the families at home. And there's a place now with this history in the making here that there could be a peer counselling service that's post-COVID to help with the after effects of COVID, rather than government here and schools pushing more English, more maths, all summer school and stuff like that, to set up a really good peer listening service, peer counselling service with delegates feeding back to staff, feeding back to the news, because I think that the news and everybody would be open to that, to hear what the children are thinking, and that would be amazing for them to get into that. And as you said, that's been, Daniel, it's been going on for ages, but make it more to do with their effects of COVID, because rather than being a token gesture, right, Noel was saying that it's not just any listening service and we're trying that again, but there's an opportunity now with COVID to see, how did you get on? What were the difficulties? What can peer group actually help with each other understand what went on in the homes, what went on teams that people weren't getting, and how difficult it was to share laptops and everything else with parents and everybody working from home. And then could actually take that, not just in their own school, but to other schools in the area and feedback to them. And any school that could actually start that, I think, would start quite a big ball rolling.
Okay, thank you very much for that. There's also a number of comments in the chat from Helen talking about the opportunities provided by Circle Time, which has been around for quite a while, but certainly there could be a place for that very much in both primary and secondary schools as we sort of move forward to try to develop what everybody's talking about, a more sort of empathetic relationship between teachers and the people that they care and work with. Any other comments from the audience? Okay, I'm gonna move on to one more question, and the question again came from the conference yesterday, and it is a little bit controversial, but I think again it's a question which goes right to use Noel's words, the heart of pastoral care. And it is the sort of issues that people who are in pastoral roles in schools, colleges, and indeed universities are wrestling with. So the question is, should mobile phones be banned in schools, or should young people be taught how to use them safely? Now, where should I go first? Mark's smiling, so let's go to Mark.
Okay, right. So being that I've been a technology specialist and I look and research at how we can leverage the power of technology, cell phones have changed what we do as teachers, okay, fundamentally. Okay, so here's the reason why. Before you could put your cell phone together with an internet device and anything else, it took a while to find stuff out. You had to actually connect to the internet and dial in. It took, it was problems. Now, if I want to know something, it's in my pocket. Everything that's ever been done, any knowledge, it's there. We can access it. So this idea that teachers are these, and this goes to something we were talking about earlier, this idea that we're these people putting this knowledge into people's heads, and it's down to us to put knowledge downhill. It's 2021, and that's an obsolete thing to think about. It's almost, we're well out of date. So we've got this tool. Everyone has them, okay? So part of our job now is to help educate the whole child to be a functioning adult in some way, whether it's in a democratic society, whether that's wherever we end up ending up in a few years' time. And so how we do learning around that is key, because now all the knowledge is there. We've got to help them make sense of it. It's not about knowing, it's what they can do with all this stuff. We've seen over the last 4 or 5 years how disinformation plays a key role, and how manipulation of social media does that too. So we've got to work with that skill too. But it also changes what we do as teachers, just in our day-to-day job. If I'm teaching something, it's not about here's knowledge, go find out. We're now having to say, well, here's what I want you to do with this information. Can you do that? Or what would you like to do with this information? Give them the choice to actually say, Because our kids, again, we don't understand how Generation Z works, but they're very creative in their own way of manipulating information and data. And so, using this as a tool, and this is really no different from having a very high-powered laptop or an iPad or anything else, using them to leverage that knowledge and actually have them build skills around them would be key. So if you ban them, it's like saying, well, banning books 100 years ago. I mean, it's 2021. With our kids starting school now are going to graduate what, 2034, 2035, and getting hopefully go to college or be professionals in some way. We don't know what sort of world that's going to be. We don't know the skills they're going to need. Right now, the students I'm taking in as freshmen at college, when they started school, there was no such thing as cybersecurity as a profession. So this idea that we're trying to ban something from the classroom because it's a distraction, well, again, this goes back to what matters to our students. Okay, here's this tool they use every day. It's how they communicate. It's how they support themselves. We could be setting up peer networks, peer counseling networks, using social media technology that already exists, and support networks within what we have, and actually using this stuff to benefit us as teachers. And instead we've said, well, no, this is bad. So we don't use it. And I think one of the things that we discovered with the pandemic is the inequity of digital access, and that we've realized that something like Wi-Fi is almost a utility now that everyone needs. Only a politician or two had come up with this idea and fought on a campaign that everyone could have Wi-Fi. This might have gone better. But anyway, so we really got to think about how we use this technology to empower our students and empower our young people to use it better and understand it. It's part of our role. You're not just a math teacher, you're not just a history teacher, you're not just a technology, you're teaching children first. And this top-down approach to, we have the knowledge, here's our curriculum, you learn this, you produce this outcome. We've got to change how it goes. So it strikes to the heart of where we go. We don't, the whole banking model teaching that that folks will try and do doesn't work. So we have to realize this is here, it's not going anywhere. But it's also changed what we do, and whether people take us seriously too. Because if I'm teaching out of a textbook that's 20 years old and probably out of date, and they can look up stuff, so well, hang on a minute, or they can look up disinformation that contradicts what we're saying, then we have credibility issues too. So there's a lot for us to think about in how we make these work. But banning them isn't the solution.
Okay, thank you, Mark. The reason the question emerged is because, and one of the reasons why I came to you first, is because about a week ago, the Secretary of State for Education, who we all listened to intensely, Gavin Williamson, said that mobile phones should be banned and that would solve all the problems in schools. So it's an interesting idea that one simple action like that will solve everything. Michelle, you've got teenage children, I think. What's your view? Should they be banned, or should we teach them how to use them safely?
Yeah, I'm a technological numpty, I think is the expression that's often used when I'm trying to kind of work with technology. And I think I would take us back to the learning through the pandemic here. How many teachers and educational professionals that you would have spoken to 18 months ago and described what they would need to do in terms of upskilling themselves to use technology to support learning would have really believed that they could be where they are today. And I think this again goes back to that kind of disconnective experience. My conversations with school leaders around how they're developing the curriculum now, they're starting to harness actually all the benefits of that technology and that ability to work differently, with young people. A really simple example is a sudden penny dropping that actually if students and pupils are absent from school for whatever reason, actually now there's a way in which they can continue to engage with learning. It's almost like it's a revolutionary idea that nobody would ever have thought about unless the pandemic came along. But actually we've been forced into this way of kind of thinking and starting to understand what the experience is for young people, not just about actually, yes, we've all got the phone, but actually we've not all got the phone. You know, not all children have got the technology that they need, and starting to think about how we ensure that if we're going to harness technology within schools, we've got to make sure that we're inclusive for everybody to be able to engage in that form of learning as well. And again, my worry is we'll slip back into our habitual patterns of not recognizing the importance of investing in children's ability to be able to access good learning wherever they are, in a safe, secure, and with appropriate critique about what it is they're accessing in terms of what's out there. You know, we live, as Mark says, we live in this kind of answer-rich world, don't we? And we all do it, don't we? The first thing you do is you go to Google or whatever search engine, and you put it in there. My leaky old guttering, you know, how do I fix that or whatever? But we've got to make sure that we're supporting our young people actually to be solution led in their own way in which they work, because the answer is not always the right answer out there. The answer, you know, comes from within, from a lot of this. And I think that what we've talked about in terms of that peer-to-peer support, you know, encouraging young people to come up with those solutions within themselves and within each other is definitely part of that journey, I think. And so no, and I do feel sorry for Gavin, because clearly something was trending on social media that he was upset about at that time. So,
well, I don't think he'll be the last politician that will look for a simple answer to what we're already seeing from the responses on the panel is a very complicated issue, because how we use technology in schools is an issue that's not going to go away. I think it was interesting you raising the idea of an inclusive approach to the use of technology, and that probably means I should go to Daniel next, because that's your sort of area, Daniel. So just remind you the question: should mobile phones be banned in schools, or should young people be taught how to use them safely?
Are you coming to me?
Yeah.
I think the real answer is I don't know. And I'm not convinced I know people who do, apart from the other panelists here, of course, who have very wise things to say. I'm not sure we as humanity, as a group of humans, have quite caught up with what's going on, and have really wrapped our heads around it. I mean, I can see advantages and disadvantages. I'd like someone to take the responsibility to teach my kids how to use telephones and the internet safely, because I feel like I'm not very good at it. And it's just one of the many things that is on my failure list as a parent. So, I mean, I don't know. And I do accept that this is an important thing. Something that I was very pleased that Phil, you honoured and excited that you were part of, was this sort of international forums of inclusion practitioners. I'm sorry to plug it here, my apologies, but the reason why I wanted to say this was because when we had a group of inclusion practitioners from 80 different countries sharing best practice, funnily enough, it just felt quite normal. Whereas if you'd mentioned that 5 years ago, that would have been like, wow, how did you do that? But actually, there wasn't that much of excitement. I mean, it was nice that somebody was in Bhutan and Somalia, and all the bees, the countries with the bees are very interesting, like Benin and Burkina Faso and Bosnia, all very interesting. But it's no longer a surprise. You know, this event, for example, is kind of like normal. I mean, it's a new normal. And I haven't caught up with it myself, really. It feels like a very important agenda item for education, but we don't really have the headspace or even the sort of sensible way of getting together. I mean, who is it that we would invite to this party to have a chat about it? And like, you know, who needs to be in charge? I mean, I suppose ultimately head teachers, but and I will say this with the greatest of genuine respect for head teachers, they tend to be a very conservative bunch, and rightly so. I mean, they're the what's it called? They safeguard the rules, right? They uphold the traditions, and they are the ones who should be most reliable to do what needs to be done. Now, the idea of doing something which cannot be so uncreatively controlled, such as using phones, it's just simply practically not going to be to the liking of most head teachers. I think that's probably more of a practical issue than whatever it is that's our you know, the latest education minister has come up with, whatever latest thing, you know, because frankly those things don't really grip. What grips is what head teachers are willing to embrace, and what they tend to embrace is more safe things. And I don't think mobile phones is considered safe at the moment. So in reality, I don't think it's going to happen. Of course, there will be the handful of quite innovative, creative schools, and what can we do with it? And then you've got quite a dynamic and diverse sort of senior leadership team, and they're used to sort of listening to voices from across the school and working with the school. They're very confident to do it, and no doubt they will embrace and they will work it out. And in the end, the knowledge will seep through to the system. But I wouldn't be confident that I have anything more sensible to say than that. And I wish I did. It's a great question.
Thank you, Daniel. Very reflective response. And I think you will be like many parents and indeed teachers who are probably not fully understanding the lives that young people are having in the 21st century with the technology that's available. I think the one thing that's certain is the experience that young people have today is not the same as the experience we had when we were young people. And I think Daniel's probably right. We've got to catch up on that. And of course, every so often we get these little bits of controversy. One head teacher, Daniel talked about head teacher, one head teacher got a lot of publicity this week because she was introducing things like whistles to give instructions to her students, and they were having to respond to whistles, and some parents loved it and some parents hated it. So I guess that's the sort of world that we're in. Daniel?
I'll just say one more thing. I think as a rule of thumb, if the education minister says it, you're probably safe to do exactly the opposite. So I don't know if that's academically proven, but you know, you'd be a fairly safe bet. So, you know, if he thinks we shouldn't, my guess is we probably should.
There's a research study for somebody there if you want to take that one on. I'd be interested.
Again, there's a book. There you go. There you
go. Margaret, if we come to you, what's your view? Should mobile phones be banned in schools, or should young people be taught how to use them safely?
I think Daniel's right. I don't think there is an easy absolute, but definitely my preference would be to use them safely and to use them really to broaden accessibility, because I think we're seeing and we learned so much through the pandemic about how children can be supported to learn more effectively, and just having access to recorded lessons, whether that's on a phone or a tablet or on Loon or whichever facility it's on, you know, being able to pre-watch a lesson and then go back and watch it again at the end. For some young people, that makes all the difference in terms of their learning. Being able to slow something down and revisit it. I mean, it's phenomenal in terms of accessibility. And I think it comes down to, you know, the phrase that I've heard people use quite a lot lately, you know, it's vital for some and it's valuable for everybody. So why wouldn't we do it? And I think the scaremongering that that we're hearing from Gavin is worrying, really, because I think it slightly plays on, and I think it'll play on further the harms and the concern we have around that. And I think it's the point of online harms and that you were making, Phil, that actually we shouldn't think about for online harms or technology purely responsible, because actually children live their lives online now. So saying there's offline harm and there's online harm, I think it's a misunderstanding of the culture that we're participating in. So actually helping them to recognise how to manage and have agency over the use, and to show how to use well, and show how to, if you've got executive function issues, you will need to manage your day, etc. These things become simple when you've got access to something like that. But if you're in a school where these things are banned, you stand out, you're different, again, you're separated, you're distinct, you're differentiated. And that's not good. We don't want that. We want belonging, we want inclusivity. And I think phones can support that really effectively if we use them wisely.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm going to come to the final member of the panel. It's only right that we come to the NAPCE member of the panel last, because it could be an opportunity now to plug the journal again. But the question is the same. Should mobile phones be banned in schools, or should young people be taught how to use them safely?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I'm speaking here as wearing many hats, as a parent, certainly, as an educator, as a researcher who's led a big EU project on cyberbullying and among teenagers across Europe, and also as the deputy editor of the journal. And there are many articles in our journal, as you know, particularly around online bullying and so on. So please do read some of those. But this has hit the headlines, not just in England, but actually over here in Belfast recently as well, with one head teacher of a girls' grammar school bemoaning the fact that girls don't talk anymore on the bus, and they don't talk anymore in registration time because they're all looking at their screens. And he was making the case where he wanted his girls to talk again and get back to the good old days where the girls needed to be shushed whenever the teacher came in, because now he was saying it was just there was silence. So it's not even just the issue of the danger of the online world, but it's about the communication skills as well. And based on the research that I've carried out in this area, we've come across what's known as the Goldilocks principle. And I'm sure you remember the story of Goldilocks and the three bears and the porridge, and it was either too hot or too cold or just right. And the evidence suggests that children and young people who have too much exposure to the online world through phones and so on are at risk. Those who have no exposure are similarly at risk for different reasons, because they're naive or don't have the skills to protect themselves, or, as I've come across, they're bullied precisely because they don't have a mobile phone and they aren't part of those networks, and they can be excluded because they're not part of those networks. So there's a happy medium. There's the sort of Goldilocks just right principle for children and young people, where they have the skills, where they have enough exposure that they're not left out, that they're not ostracized for being this sort of weird kid, but they certainly don't have too much exposure. And there's evidence that the children who spend most time online are most likely to be victims of cyberbullying and so on and so forth. So I would say that. And the second thing, and finally, and a lot has been said, this I agree with completely. One of my other areas of interest is as a parent governor of a special school, and I think there's a real need here to remember children and young people with learning difficulties, even severe learning difficulties, and they are particularly vulnerable to this online world. And actually, there's a real lack of resources and training for those young people. They want to be like their friends. They're on social media, but they're extremely vulnerable there. So I would say it's not about banning. It's really not about banning mobile phones. It's very definitely about teaching our children and young people to use them safely.
Thank you, Noel. You didn't sit on the fence there in the end. That was very much appreciated. We have run over a little bit, so thank you very much, everybody, for staying with us and being part of it. But I think the discussion, we had 3 questions, but the issues that came out of those questions were a wide range of different issues, which are important to everybody that's involved in education, and especially people who are interested in pastoral care and supporting young people to achieve their full potential. we've come across some interesting concepts as well, like the wrecking ball concept and approach to education, the Goldilocks principle, and of course the whites of their eyes interview strategy. So we've all learned something from those different sort of contributions this evening. I hope members of the audience have found it interesting and stimulating. I'm sure you have. And if you're watching this on catch up because you're watching the recording, you missed something really good. It's a shame you weren't there live, but hopefully it's useful to you. Can I really thank the members of the panel, because we have been so lucky tonight to have people with so much experience and such an insight into education. And it's for those of us who've been here, we've been fortunate to be able to share that experience this evening. So really sincerely, thank you very much on behalf of NAPCE for being part of tonight's event. And I suppose my final plug, just to end the evening, is the last day of the conference is tomorrow morning. We've got 3 more presentations, which I'm sure will be very interesting and stimulating. So please join them if you can. Next year is the 40th anniversary of National Association of Pastoral Care and Education. I did say I wasn't going to say that again, but NAPCE. And we're planning lots of activities, including a live face-to-face conference, which we used to have in the past. You probably can't remember them, but we did used to have them, and lots of other events as well. So please follow NAPCE on Twitter. Please send your comments on Twitter. And from me, thank you very much for being part of, I think, what's been an excellent evening and a great opportunity to share some ideas with some really knowledgeable experts. Thank you. And okay, it means you can leave now, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Margaret.